Welcome, everybody, to the Sentinels of Liberty podcast. I almost just spilled my drink off screen, but that's how it goes sometimes. I'm just kind of getting caught up in the moment here, just getting a few things set. But we are here. I am your host, Redbeard, and I thank you for coming by this evening to hear some of the things that we have to talk about and to kind of provide a little bit of information, hopefully, that you can walk away from a little bit more educated, a little bit more facts and a little bit of history and all of those great things. There is a ridiculous bug over here. That just the on-screen antics, right? But I digress. Anyways, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I want to make it a point to let everybody know that this coming Saturday, I will not be doing an episode. Matter of fact, I'm going to be going out hiking, and I'm going to go touch some grass, and I'm going to spend some time enjoying essentially the autumn and fall time, and really just taking a load off, not having to pay attention to any of the absolute chaos that's going on. In the end of the day, anytime you start to cover a lot of issues or all of this stuff, you just have to accept the fact you're not going to cover all of it. It's virtually impossible. So I don't get super caught up in all of that. But I hope tonight leaves you with something as a bit of a primer for the rest of your week, something to think about when you go into your weekend, and hopefully you enjoy it. So you're probably just like, Redbeard, shut up. You know, what are we talking about even? Well, I'm getting to that. So tonight we're going to be talking about Founders Warnings. So this is the third one, I believe, in my Founders Warnings kind of series. I'm really actually enjoying putting these together and doing these because it's kind of good for me to be able to brush up on some stuff, but also I enjoy being able to present this type of information to everybody. One, because I find it very interesting, but two, I think it is very, very integral to wanting to try and change things, right? Like if we don't understand our history and we forget who we are and we forget where we come from, there's a lot of issues that stem from that. So I think it's fundamental, it's foundational, and it really helps. So we're doing Founders Warnings, and this one is going to be around political parties, factions, democracy, and empire in particular. It's going to be leaning a little bit heavier on the political parties and factions realm, but we are going to have a little bit of sprinkling of conversations about democracy and about empire in between. So I will shut up about all of that, and I will start getting into the meat and potatoes of what the conversation is. So look, I'm going to start off giving a little bit of a preface here. Okay, so essentially, let's form the stage. In 1796, George Washington stepped away voluntarily from power, right? This is something that overwhelmingly was practically unheard of the time, but also it's still practically unheard of today, right? It's not something that most people do. And in addition to that, a lot of people, when we look at founding documents, we look at certain things and we revere the Constitution. We look at the Bill of Rights. You know, some people might, dabble into the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, but they don't really get super into it. And I like all of those things. I also like seeing some of the personal correspondence between the founding fathers, the founding mothers, and all of the people that were involved. But one of the things that I think a lot of people who study history really want to, expand their knowledge or to gain a little bit of insight, we really like to go back and look at his farewell address. And I think a lot of that is because so many of the things that he has talked about ultimately have either come true or are very timely in their nature. And I think it wasn't just a goodbye, but it essentially was a roadmap for how we can preserve, the republic, how it is that we can look out for these things, how it is that we can try and create a bulwark or a bastion, or at least identify different threats that may occur to the republic. Now, moving on from that, he also spoke of unity, virtue, independence, but also left grave warnings and dangers that he saw on the horizon. This is a theme that not only our founding fathers saw, but the founding mothers, especially Mercy Otis Warren, and so many of the amazing, incredible women of the American Revolution had talked about. And they had let their grievances be known, and they had let their concerns be known, as well as also saying that there was hope for the future. And a few of these things that our founders, and George Washington in particular, were pretty vehemently concerned about, if you will, were things like factions in political parties. We also have the corrupting spirit of democracy, and in conjunction, foreign entanglements that would transform a republic into an empire. We see all of these things today. And I think when we evaluate all of these things, they do tend to be a bit overwhelming. And so when we can go back and really look and see some of these founding documents, not only can we find some of the warnings and, the perceived dangers that they had, but there is some hope in there too. They also, in these founding documents, they also give us some hope that we also have access to this blueprint to be able to try and change things. Okay. That is one of the beautiful things about the way that they did things, is not only did they archive and catalog and make sure that all of these things were at our disposal, they weren't hidden from the public at all. And their transparency was pretty well examined, right, by history. History tends to support this. And so we can go back and look at these things, and we can start to figure out solutions. We can start to identify things. We can start to figure out what should happen and what shouldn't happen. And I think that's the beauty of it. Now, moving on, there is a central warning that I would like to point out by Washington. And Washington spoke about parties and factionism, and he kind of said this. Well, not kind of. He did say this. The alternate dominion of one faction over another, sharpened by the spirit of revenge, right, is itself a frightful despotism. But this leads to length a more formal and permanent despotism. So what he's saying is, like, look, when you have these situations where there's favoritism, and you want the alternative, dominion or domination of one party over the other. For example, the Republicans versus the Democrats. Whenever you see this type of thing, ultimately what it's going to devolve into is a despotism. And with given enough time, it becomes a permanent despotism. Carrying on, he warned that parties divide citizens into tribes, erode unity, and open the door for ambitious men to seize power, something of which we've seen a lot of, I would say, especially contemporarily. When we look at how we want to actually frame this, there are some principles, or a principle that we can use to kind of help be our compass here. America was not founded as a democracy. It was designed as a constitutional republic, a system where liberty is protected by the law and not left to the passions of the majority. Okay, we see this in things like the Constitution. Now, mind you, the Constitution does not enforce itself. However, there was an expectation by the founders that we would be the enforcement wing, especially of preserving, protecting, defending, and even potentially retaking that which was taken from us. Now, moving on here, Benjamin Franklin also has a very, very famous quote. Benjamin Franklin asked, what had been created? Okay, what had been creative? He answered simply, and most of you know what this is going to be, right? Very famous. A republic, if you can keep it. The challenge was always aimed at us, the people, reinforcing the point that I had just made earlier. It was always about us. It was always on us, and it was always our responsibility and our duty to preserve, maintain, and defend the republic. This was something that was echoed time and time and again. So that's a little bit of framing here for moving forward. Now, moving on, we're going to start delving into our segments as we do, and we're going to examine with the first portion here of Washington on factions. Okay, Washington knew the spirit of party was natural. Of course, people are always going to have that spirit, right? But destructive if allowed to dominate. So essentially, he always knew that people were going to want to split into parties or whatever the case might be. But he also understood that it wasn't so much to prevent these things, but it was to make sure that they didn't dominate the entire conversation. They didn't dominate the entire sphere. He described how parties agitate the community with ill-founded jealousies and false alarms. In addition, kindle animosity of one part against another, and something of which we see very prevalently. Going on from this point, distract from the public good, weaken government, and it invites corruption. All of these points that he asserts and these points that he makes are something that has not only been contemporary to our time and not just something we see in a day-to-day, but these things stretch back way, way back, over a century, even back to the Civil War. These are not new things. These are things that have been dominating factors in our society, unfortunately, for a very long time. The most chilling, or probably one of the most prominent portions of this, parties make people loyal to a faction instead of principle. And I think that's a very important thing to really recognize. And I think not just when you're talking about other people, but it should be a moment for us where we pause, we step back, and we evaluate, are our loyalties, right? Do we care more about the general principle, and I would argue the general principle of liberty, the founding documents, what this nation was founded on, or are we loyal to a party or a faction? And when we examine this type of thing, we have to consider where we stand. We have to be honest about it. And if we are aligning a little bit more with the party than we are probably the principles, then we should take some pause and really examine what it is that we are expecting or what we want. And if that's the way that you go, then I guess that's your decision. But here, being a Liberty channel, I would say that the most important thing is to uphold these principles and to make sure that no party corrupts your ability to adhere to your principles, that no party takes away from your principles, and no party usurps your principles. Parties, they exist. They're not something that ever really goes away, but we have to be jealously guarding our principles, our liberties, and our rights. Now, moving on to the second portion here, we're going to get into Madison's framework in Federalist 10 and 51. Madison called faction inevitable, rooted in human nature, differences in wealth and opinion, of course. I mean, we see this on a day-to-day basis. In addition, he defined factions as a number of citizens united by some common impulse of passion, which we see, or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. I think it's very well said. I don't feel that there necessarily needs to be any more elaboration on that. And I think when we examine this, we do see this a lot. We do see the control that this factionism, these parties really do have over people. And we look and see how they dominate the lives of people, but ultimately how the people in these factions and in these parties seek to dominate the lives of others. Often, arguing for the usurpation of other people's rights and liberties. I don't like that you said this, or I don't think you should have that. And so they use this powerhouse and this machine of factionism and parties in order to usurp these things, thinking that they are somehow above any reproach whatsoever, or that they're immune to these very same mechanisms, when that's just simply not the case. It eventually does come back to bite them. There are some solutions here. And Madison actually has a pretty interesting take here. Don't abolish factions. That would actually abolish liberty, the right of people to actually congregate and assemble and to come forward and discuss their opinions and come, to a point of common cause. I could definitely understand that. And I don't necessarily think that that would be the appropriate thing either when we look at it. Instead, examine like a control of the effects, through a large republic and constitutional structure, where if you have the ability to create a republic to the point to where all of these factions, all of these parties can reasonably spread out, and their influence isn't necessarily concentrated in one area or the other, which I think is the crux of what his argument is, then you have a better ability to avoid a despotism. You have a better ability to avoid this type of centralizing power or the centralizing form of governance, right? And moving on to Federalist 51, I want to just put out here too, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, okay? The Republic was engineered to keep factions from devouring liberty. That is the way that we were structured. It is the way that we were designed. But again, when you look at the defense of liberty, you look at the defense of the Republic, and you also ultimately look at the implementation of the Constitution, as it was pointed to earlier, this requires an active populace, and not just an active populace, but an educated populace. If you simply just go and act all the time without fundamentally having the education to make that difference, then you're going to be fraught with a lot of trepidation, a lot of peril, and a lot of problems down the road. Now, moving into segment 3, we're going to examine John Adams on parties and democracy. Adams foresaw our present condition, okay, as did many founders. Many of our founders fundamentally understood what the outcome would be if we should get to this point. There's nothing which I dread so much as a division of the Republic into 2 great parties. This is to be dreaded as the greatest political evil under our Constitution. Those are some pretty strong words. And it's amazing that he, got it so right, seemingly. This idea of 2 dominating parties, these 2 dominating factions, really controlling the mechanisms and the every aspect of the day-to-day life of the average American, up all the way through the highest forms of government. John Adams, as well as many of our founders, they really did see into the future, and they really did get a good grasp based off of their own experiences as to how this might turn out. Now, moving on, he tied this to democracy also. Democracy never lasts long. It soon wastes, exhausts, and murders itself, right? There was never a democracy yet that did not commit suicide. I think those are very powerful words. Those are words that really do make a lot of sense. And when you look at it, and you look at the outcomes of how these things occurred, and you look at, again, examples of democracies, they really do hamstring themselves, and they really do kind of dig their own hole and just jump in the hole at the end of the day. Adams and Madison and Washington and so many others, it is amazing, once again, to just see the foresight that some of these men had looking forward. And honestly, like Mercy Otis Warren and so many of the other founding mothers, I mean, they were so ahead of their time, but what they used in order to have a foresight or a looking forward point of view was history itself. They picked up on patterns. They saw what would become of this, and they ultimately were able to create this framework and this map as to what the outcome would be. We have to get back to doing the same thing if we are not only going to fix things, but if we're going to see what the actual problems are and where they stem from. Now, moving forward, segment 4 is Jefferson's paradox. Thomas Jefferson, was also just another person ahead of its time. I know I keep saying this, but really, if you go back and you look at so many of these conversations, they really did see. They picked up on it. Jefferson at first warned against parties. He wrote the dangers of dividing the nation into angry and bloody camps. And again, very contemporarily, what do we have? We have angry and bloody camps. We really do. People who want their faction or their party to dominate the other party and assuming that they're more right than the other one, all while eschewing and throwing out their principles. Their principles and their moral compass are seemingly directed at the behest of the party instead of where they should be grounded at. Going on, yet by 1800, he became the leader of the Democratic Republicans against Hamilton's Federalists. And for those of you that aren't super familiar, these Republicans were also known as Jeffersonian Republicans. His paradox proved how seductive factionalism was, right? Even men who feared it became consumed by it. And I think that that's a very interesting point in history, because when you look at it, Jefferson was, he was a pretty principled guy, one could say. And even he eventually ended up in that realm to where he got involved too. And again, it's not necessarily the fact that, like, as mentioned in the beginning, that it's an inherently bad thing, but it's one of these things to where when you become so consumed by it that it starts to override your principles, your morals, your direction, essentially your entire compass, that it becomes very, very detrimental, right? And when it becomes the center focus of everything that you do and the way that you vote or conduct yourself, whatever the case is, well, it becomes a very, very trepidatious and perilous path. His By the election of 1800, just 4 years after Washington's farewell address, America had already hardened into two warring camps. Think about that. That was after Washington, okay? And I didn't even go back far enough. I said back to the Civil War, and that it goes back even farther. So just think about how seductive, how easy it was to slip in just at that point, shortly after Washington's farewell address. I mean, that really should perk the ire of most people who care to know about history, who care to preserve liberty, and realize just how perilous of a situation being involved in this party and factional type of warfare and system can be. In segment 5, we're going to continue going on the republic versus democracy. The founders despised democracy as unstable and emotional and tyrannical, right? All of these things were evaluated, and they were really kind of examined at their core levels, and they took apart these things. And when they started to put together the republic that we ended up with, right, they were like, okay, what is going to be the best for preserving liberty? They understood that government was a necessary evil. There was no qualms about the fact that many of them seemed, like if we were all angels, we wouldn't even need government, right? But they had to figure out which system was going to be the most effectual, that would empower the people and preserve liberty and rights. And they ended up with a republic, but they despised democracy. And when you look at some of the quotes that I'm about to read from Franklin, a republic, if you can keep it, right? Again, putting that onus on us and putting this sense of duty and responsibility that we are the preservers, we are the stewards of our republic. Adams, there never was a democracy that did not commit suicide, right? In addition, Madison warned against popular passions overtaking reason. When we look at democracy, majority rules, minorities trampled, rights vanish when unpopular. And that is the system ultimately that we have today. And when you look at it in the broader aspect of how things are, you could look at our exploits around the world as very empirical, right? It's a very empire-driven system. A republic, however, as we were founded, has a rule of law. It has checks and balances. Rights are protected from both monarchs and mobs. That was why we were founded as a constitutional republic and not a democracy. It was fundamentally understood what the dangers were. And while it wasn't perfect, and while they understood that it wasn't perfect, they ultimately felt that it was the most effectual way forward. Moving ahead, Washington feared that democracy plus factions equals alternating tyranny, each side crushing the other when in power. It didn't really matter who was in power. It didn't really matter who it was that was in play. They understood that this back and forth just was going to result in more tyranny. And I mean, it might upset some people, but look, like the election of Trump, I think, is also very evident of that. We didn't really get any more liberty. We didn't really get anything better. We just traded one faction or the dominating party for another. And this is the way that it's been for a very, very long time. Obviously, it's been a long-standing maxim all the way back to 1800. Moving on to segment 6 here, or the sixth part of what it is that I'm trying to discuss, early proofs are evident in history. In 1790s, the Federalists versus the Democratic Republicans, or also known as the Jeffersonian Republicans, partisan press wars, venomous accusations, loyalty to party over principle. When we look at the Adams presidency, Alien and Sedition Acts weaponized against opposition newspapers, a direct violation of liberty and service of a faction. When we look at the mid-1800s, the collapse of the Whigs, rise of the Republicans, and deepening sectional divides. Okay, When we go back to even the Civil War, parties entrenched sectional tribalism, right? Leading to national bloodshed. These are all different examples. Uh, at every stage confirmed Washington's warning: factions weaken unity and invite despotism. They were abundantly clear about this, and they understood what the dangers were. And so, therefore, we also have to go back and we have to recognize these dangers. And if we become more educated, we fundamentally understand what the flaws are, and we fundamentally understand how it is that we can go about to start redressing or addressing, rather, these grievances, then we have a way forward and we have the blueprints to do this. We have the ability to do this. We're not without options here. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people fundamentally don't understand is they look around and they're like, but what options do we have? And there's a lot of options. If you go back and you study a lot of these documents, it gives you a lot of these answers, or it gives you a pathway forward. We cannot start to change something until we become educated in the thing that we want to support and the thing that we want to do away with, essentially, right? Which is tyranny, aggression to liberty, and so on. Moving forward to the seventh portion of this, the U.S. as an empire, right? Washington also warned against foreign entanglement, something that we talked about in the first ever episode in this kind of series, I guess. Yet today, America is an empire. That is, without a doubt, a fundamental truth. Hundreds of military bases worldwide, trillions spent overseas, while liberty erodes here at home. And in addition to that, John Quincy Adams warned, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. He said doing so would abandon liberty at home. It was an understood maxim that we do not go gallivanting around the globe to just seek out enemies, to seek out monsters, to make an excuse to go and to set all these things up, or to fight ridiculous wars over lies and very, very treasonous and or seditious behavior. This was not the aim of how we were supposed to be. And yet today, that is the result of what we have. Both parties may fight each other domestically, but they unite on sustaining empire abroad. Proof that the factions, they serve power. They don't serve liberty at all, and they certainly don't serve you. And so we're left with a situation that is very volatile, and it's very trepidatious in this path. Empires always destroy republics. Without a doubt, there's no question in the world that this is the case. Rome fell this way, and the founders knew it. And it wasn't just Rome. It was many, many other nations and peoples that ultimately fell to the same wiles and desires that are being explained here. In the eighth segment, we're going to actually talk about a little bit of the responsibility of the people and kind of how this works, right? Franklin, a republic, if you can keep an emphasis on keep, right? It was always our job to maintain and keep and defend not only our republic, but our rights and our liberties. This was foundational. He understood, right, that the Constitution, the principles enshrined there, and the principles in so many of our conversations and the documents that we have as a nation that were meticulously put together over the founding era, he understood that these things only had force so long as the people were educated, moral, and of good, sound mind, right? They understood that we were the stewards of our republic, nobody else. Jefferson also speaks on this. The price of liberty is eternal vigilance, giving way to the notion that, look, this battle's forever. It's not just going to go away one day. It's not just going to disappear overnight. And it's not just going to be something that is just ultimately not going to be a thing. But instead, he emphasized that it was eternal vigilance that was required in order to maintain liberty and rights, the republic, and ultimately to thwart the forces of tyranny and despotism, and perhaps I would even argue evil in and of itself. Washington trusted the people to be the guardians of their republic, not the politicians, and certainly not the parties. To bring it down to a pitch point here, The founders understood liberty dies when the people stop holding leaders accountable, right? And instead pledge loyalty to their favorite faction or their favorite party. In the end of the day, this creates a very volatile cocktail that affords you nothing in return, but was willing to take everything from you in exchange. Now, going on, let's examine everything that we've gone over here. Let's take a moment to reflect. Washington's words read practically like prophecy. It wasn't simply a farewell address. It wasn't a simple goodbye. He gave us essentially a look into the future to see what it is that we might expect. In addition, he foresaw that factions would divide us, essentially, and democracy would destabilize us, and empire would enslave us, all of which he was way over the target on, right? Madison engineered a republic to resist those dangers, but with the emphasis that the people were the stewards and they had to be educated, and the founders emphasized education, morality, and a desire to maintain the republic, right? Adams saw parties in democracy as the greatest evils. Jefferson succumbed to the very force it is that he feared, even just showing you that even the best of us during that time were not capable of constantly avoiding corruption, that sometimes it does happen. And that I think that should be a very prominent point that we should all examine, that we should take an introspective look, step back, and examine, where do we lie? Do we care about liberty as individuals? Do we care about the principles? Do we care about these things? And it's not enough. You can't sit there and immediately point the finger at somebody else, because you are expected to maintain it. So what are you doing as an individual? And not so much just pointing the finger at why something is broken. Where are you in this process? And I think that was something that was echoed time and time and again by our founders. Franklin left the responsibility, as I was just talking about, squarely on us, the people. It was a responsibility. It was something that was understood, that the greatest stewards, the greatest way to preserve these things was through the people. And again, education, morality, and having the will to move forward, I think, are all fundamental. Some closing quotes that I want to just review here. The alternate dominion of one faction over the other is itself a frightful despotism. So I want you to take that with you tonight, and I want you to think about that. What does that mean to you? As well as some of these other quotes. Adams, there was never a democracy that did not yet commit suicide, right? Jefferson, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. Franklin, a republic if you can keep it. And John Quincy Adams, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. There is a simple call to action that I would like to put out forth. Reject the blind party loyalty. You as an individual have the ability to do this. We have to make sure that we maintain our compass in our upholding of our principles and our liberties. It's not so much about what other people do all the time. We have to be able to have our house in order as individuals so that we can move forward to be an example and to be the steward that we need to be. Resist empire abroad. It is incompatible with liberty at home, and it has no place in our country and amongst our people. Reclaim your role as the guardian of the republic. This is fundamental. If you want the change to happen, if you want to see something better, then you have to be a fundamental part of making that happen. As sentinels of liberty, remember the republic will not keep itself. This is a very important point. That responsibility has always been and always will be on us. With that being said, that is the show I have for you today. I'm going to take a few moments here just to kind of scroll through the comments as I do at the end. But I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you were able to get something out of what it is that I was talking about today. And perhaps maybe it will even get you to step back and kind of examine what it is that you do, what it is that you could be doing, or what it is you feel that you are called to do, because I think that's very important. There's a lot of different ways to be involved. There's a lot of different ways to be active. There's a lot of ways to get educated now and to better yourself moving forward. And I think that it is fundamentally upon our shoulders to be able to carry that burden as was expected. So that is the message I leave you with today. So I'm going to scroll through some comments here real quick, just address a few things. I'm not going to probably do all of them, but I'd like to address a few. So let's go up here. And I see that there's a lot of people that came in here. David, Gene, the Machine, right? Centerline Systems, Learn Me Something, Chuck, and I think a few others here. Let's see exactly where we are at today, but a uniparty playing the sides against the other. This was by Centerline Systems, and you're absolutely right, man. Like, that is really what it ends up, and that's exactly where we are today. Same in the UK, left versus right, young versus old, everyone versus everyone. And the crazy thing is, Gene, is like it was the UK, it was Great Britain that our founders learned this from. And I always keep saying that there were 5 fundamental documents that came from your people, our founders, that they drew inspiration from. And with each consecutive document, more and more liberties and rights were recognized by your people. And I believe that that is still inherently in and amongst your people. I don't believe that ever went away. You guys just have to find it. You have to find it within yourself. Go back and look at these documents. Go back and examine what it is and where you came from. And I think that's vitally important. So, don't hang your head low, man. You got to pick it up, and hopefully you can find a way that's the most effectual for you to do that. So align, let's see here. Centerline Systems. Align with the Constitution, or you can F off. Parties should only discuss the how we are going to get the mandatory areas of responsibility completed and addressed, in my opinion. And I think that's a really interesting point. I think there is a time and a place for parties, for organization, for group. Like our founders even recognized, it's bound to happen. But as long as we can try to stem their influence and prevent or at least mitigate them from really consolidating that power, that's going to be huge. And when we look at it today, and you look at what the left and the right has both done to stifle other parties from coming into the conversation, that should raise a lot of eyebrows and really draw a huge ire of suspicion of whether or not, you're in a situation to where you really have a choice. And in the end of the day, you really got to take the initiative and create that choice for yourself, because Lord knows that nobody else is going to do that for you. So if you have viable people, even if they're not from the left or the right, they're worth a consideration. They're worth giving a shot. They can't possibly be that much worse than what we have today. And today is an absolute dumpster fire, right? I mean, it's with the way that we're going. I mean, we are pretty deep into a despotism, I would argue. And I would say that the empire is alive and well. So, I mean, really, don't sacrifice your principles. Don't sacrifice your liberty for the sake of a party. Look at people, examine the people that are running in and around your area, and really see if they align with your principles. Look at the merits, look at the things that they do, and I think you'll be able to find better quality candidates and better people to take upon that mantle. So, and if you don't like anybody, then take upon that mantle yourself, or do something that's going to help further the progression of making that change that you want to see. So that, I like that comment, man. That was great. Let's see here. But it should be everyone versus the reptiles. Well, you may have a point there, Gene. You may have a point there. Caucuses are parties inside of parties. Yeah. So Chuck and Money, that's a very good observation. That's a very good point, honestly. That is pretty much the truth. And I think that in the grand scheme of things, again, like, they're not terrible. They are a great way to organize. They're a great way to get people involved. They're a great way to really bring to bear a lot of the good things that people have to offer, and a lot of the great things. as long as they don't start to get destructive of their own means and destructive of themselves. And that's a very tall order to ask. But I think there is a way to do that. And I think there is a way that these things can be effective, and I think they can be good. And I do agree with our founders that, look, in the end of the day, like, you're never going to get rid of these things, but we also shouldn't aim to get rid of these things. So I think that's a great point, Chuck. Thank you for that comment. Let's go through here. Yeah, it's, another one by CLS. And yet we are adopting the mob type mentality in our society today. Yes, we are. And, I think when we go back and we look at history, what we find is that is something that's been happening for a very long time. Clearly, since almost the 1800s, it seems. It started there, and it certainly didn't slow down by any means. And I just want to hit one or two more here. The promise of war brings out the greedy and the controlling warmongers. This is by Gene the Machine, or Gene from across the pond. You're 100% right, man. And it is a very unfortunate thing, because warmongers, they don't, they come from both sides. And really, it doesn't really matter so much at that point, left or right. You're really just getting the same flavor, just in a slightly different, wrapper, if you will. So, all right, we'll do two more here. This is a history lesson, and I am loving and learning from. Woo, thank you, Redbeard. I appreciate Eugene the Machine, and I appreciate everybody who came in, learned me something. Also echoed the same sentiment as well. Great presentation. I appreciate it. I try and do my best. Sometimes, it starts off in a ball of chaos, but we get there. 100%. Let's just do one more here. Foundational. Foundational is the key aspect of all of this, right? Like, we've got to have a solid foundation, and we do have a solid foundation. Now we just have to be the stewards of that foundation. We have to be involved. We have to get active. And I do believe that the more and more that we start to see this at the community level, and it is happening, simply because you don't see it does not mean that it's not happening, right? This is happening, and there are people that are working hard. There are people that are working tirelessly. There are people that are putting in the time, and there needs to be more people doing it. They have to, they need help. And if you want to be that difference, if you want to be that change, get in the fight. And if you don't know where that fight is, or you don't know where to start, well, let me posit a couple things here, right? Like the American Liberty Caucus, big shout out to them. They will help you find that fight. They will help you find that purpose to some degree, and help, if there's something you want to get into, they do put out a ton of classes. There's a lot of different things that they will pass. I shouldn't say they necessarily, but they do offer other people's classes and stuff like that can help you cultivate a really good foundation. And in addition, if you go to Liberty First Society, I believe it is, I will put it in the description below. Chrisanne Hall has a second to none education system that will help you learn how to, one, understand your history a little bit better, but two, she has an activism boot camp, something that will help kind of give you a primer as to how you can get started, how you can get involved, and where you can get involved, and the best way to be effective in doing so. And that's just one of many, many classes that her and her husband, JC, put on, and it's an ever-growing library. So I'll put that description in the link below. Go check that out. And I think for like the first week, it's $1, and then it's $20 a month. Really, it's negligible when you're getting a first-class education by a phenomenal constitutional lawyer. Highly recommend. So with that being said, thank you everybody for coming out this evening. I hope you all, and everybody who sees this in the future, I hope you all enjoyed this episode and really genuinely was able to take something away from it. I really appreciate all the support that you guys and gals give me. I couldn't do it without you. You guys keep me moving forward. And with that, we're going to hit some outro music. So here we go. Let her rip. Steel clad
Liberty burn forever.